How are we going to get rid of racism until...
Stop talking about it.
People don't understand. I was the last choice for every one of these movies that you see me in, for the most part.
These are 15 black actors who are now past 80, and their lives prove fame never comes easy. Sure, we all know them as legends, but behind the spotlight were prison sentences, scandals, and battles with racism that nearly broke them. Let's start with none other than Morgan Freeman's story that isn't the straight noble climb people imagine.
Black History Month, you find...
ridiculous.
Why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Long before he became the calm, commanding voice of Hollywood, he was stuck in a job he hated. From 1971 to 1976, he played goofy characters like Easy Reader on The Electric Company, an educational show for kids.
And of course you wouldn't, right? Of course you wouldn't. There would be no need for it. By the way, the black and Jewish connection as it relates to civil rights are deeply connected.
He later admitted he despised every second of it, saying he was fried after 4 years and hated himself for not having the courage to walk away. At 34, he desperately needed the paycheck, but inside, he was miserable. Ironically, the very role that almost broke him gave him the stability that led to his breakout in Street Smart.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh!
His earlier life shows just how restless he was. In 1955, at only 18, he turned down a drama scholarship to chase his dream of flying with the Air Force. He signed up, worked on radar stations, and finally got into the cockpit of a jet. He suddenly realized the job wasn't about the excitement of flying. It was about dealing death from the skies. That harsh truth crushed his dream, and by 1959, he left the military as an airman first class. Acting, not flying, became his real calling. Then came the accident that nearly cost him everything. On August 3rd, 2008, driving a friend's 1997 Nissan Maxima in Mississippi, Freeman blacked out from atrial fibrillation. The car rolled several times. His left arm was shattered. Doctors had to put in a plate, and the nerve damage caused permanent pain. He even had to give up sailing after realizing he could no longer dock his boat. The black glove he always wears isn't for style. It hides the damage and helps manage the pain. Doctors later gave him a pacemaker, and he's often said he's lucky to be alive. But Freeman's story isn't only tragedy and regret. In 2014, at 77, he shocked everyone by turning his 124-acre Mississippi ranch into a bee sanctuary. He started with 26 hives, never wore protective gear, and claimed he never got stung. Bill Cosby's story is nothing like the clean, smiling image that once dominated TV screens. In the 1960s, he wasn't just a comedian. He was the first black actor to headline a prime-time drama with I Spy. He won 3 consecutive Emmy Awards between 1966 and 1968, smashing through barriers that had held back black actors for decades. By the time The Cosby Show exploded in the 1980s, he was running television. The show racked up 8 Emmy nominations in one season, but Cosby shocked everyone when he withdrew his own name from the Best Actor category.
There's no comment about that. And I'll tell you why. I think you were told. I don't want to compromise your integrity.
It wasn't humility, it was strategy. He didn't want to split votes and cost his show the Best Comedy Prize. It worked, and his maneuver became legendary. At the height of his career, he had 8 Grammys, 3 Primetime Emmys, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and honorary degrees stacked on top of each other. Fast forward to 2018, and that towering legacy collapsed overnight. He was expelled from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences the same week as Harvey Weinstein and Roman Polanski, stripped of the Kennedy Center honors, and lost at least 5 honorary degrees in rapid succession.
But I'm asking your integrity that since I didn't want to say anything, but I did answer you in terms of I don't want to say anything of what value will it have.
Behind the fame, the legal chaos was already brewing. In 2006, he paid Andrea Constand a $3.38 million settlement to end her civil lawsuit. But instead of disappearing, that deal became the key evidence that resurrected the criminal case years later. When Cosby was sent to prison, the drama didn't stop. He was also trying to quietly settle 7 defamation suits from women who claimed he smeared their reputations by calling them liars. Today, Cosby's absence from public life is about more than scandal. He is now 88 years old and completely blind, a result of keratoconus that started years before his conviction. In court, he often had to be guided to stand before the judge, and now he spends most of his days at home, occasionally releasing statements through spokespeople. Billy D. Williams may have played the galaxy's smoothest gambler, but his real life was far messier, funnier, and sometimes even harsher than anything in Star Wars. When he first stepped into Lando Calrissian's cape in 1980's The Empire Strikes Back, he thought he'd struck gold. Instead, he became the target of a strange kind of fan fury. Viewers couldn't separate the actor from the character, and many treated him like he personally betrayed Han Solo.
I'd be in the middle of the schoolyard, and kids would run up to me and say, "You betrayed Han Solo." And I found myself having to justify this characters.
People confronted him in public. Kids at his daughter's school teased her until she cried, and one woman even scolded him in a grocery store about loyalty. Williams eventually snapped back with lines like, "Did anybody die? It's a movie!" But the damage was done. It took years, and Lando's redemption in Return of the Jedi for fans to forgive him. Even then, he said regaining their respect was a long, exhausting process.
Well, maybe that's why I become someone else, because I'm really insecure. Because I don't really like to talk about myself, and I like to keep to myself.
Decades later, Williams was back in the headlines for a completely different reason. In 2019, at 82, he casually told an interviewer that he saw himself as both masculine and feminine. Overnight, the internet crowned him Hollywood's first gender-fluid Star Wars legend. But Williams wasn't making any identity statement. He was talking about Jungian psychology, the balance of anima and animus inside everyone. Then there's his shrewdness when it comes to contracts. Williams has never been shy about saying, "Pay me a lot of money and I'll sell my soul." During the original trilogy, his team secured perks and merchandising royalties rarely given to actors of color at the time. He built Lando's style himself, right down to the capes, refusing to play just another stereotype. Even in Batman, where he played Harvey Dent in 1989, he cleverly inserted a clause in his contract to be considered for Two-Face in sequels. Garrett Morris's story is the kind that makes you sit back and wonder how one man could survive so much and still make people laugh.
You know, now they add Earl to it, but one of the names I'm called all the time is Stan, and that's because of that show. You know, and I'm thankful for Martin hooking it up.
Long before he became known as the first black cast member on Saturday Night Live, his life was marked by struggles that were anything but funny. In 1994, at 57, he was shot during a robbery in South Central Los Angeles. He had been getting his car detailed when attackers confronted him. Morris told them he had no money, but one bullet ripped through his arm and another tore into his abdomen, leaving him bleeding internally. Doctors rushed him into emergency surgery, and for months, he recovered with a colostomy bag and a shunt for medication. With his trademark dark humor, he later joked, "I thought, oh, so that's not going to be it, huh?" Even stranger, while he was stuck in a hospital bed, his character on Martin was written as if he was hiding from the law, blurring the line between TV and reality. And in a rare twist of justice, when his shooter was locked up, other inmates, who happened to be fans, turned on him.
By the time I'm in my 20s, I'm actually angry that I'm a Christian.
But his brushes with danger and discrimination started much earlier. Morris grew up in the segregated South, raised by his grandparents because his mother was only 16. Racism wasn't just an obstacle, it was constant. He was even arrested multiple times for the simple act of walking while black in Los Angeles. And despite graduating from Juilliard and spending nearly a decade singing backup for Harry Belafonte, his early career was marked by rejection and being pushed to the margins. Today, at 88, Garrett Morris still carries that mix of toughness and wit that's defined him from the start. After decades of breaking stereotypes, surviving gunshots, and clawing his way back from addiction, he finally received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Robert Hooks isn't just the actor you remember from Star Trek III. or Passenger 57, his story is rooted in defiance, risk, and building something that shook American theater to its core. In 1967, frustrated by Broadway's refusal to give black artists real opportunities, Hooks co-founded the Negro Ensemble Company with a $434,000 grant from the Ford Foundation, later rising to $1.5 million. He finally had the resources to put black talent at the center of the stage.
I was seeing all these plays as a student at Bessie V. I was seeing all these plays, and all white plays. I never saw any black people on stage. When I did, they were carrying trays or doing something crazy. Stereotypical.
But the money that fueled the company also created a storm. Some activists accused him of selling out black theater for white money, arguing that taking foundation funds compromised the mission. The controversy exploded when their first play, Song of the Lusitanian Bogey, written by a European playwright, debuted. Protests broke out. Activists stormed the theater, and later in London, the cast was even heckled by right-wing groups.
So I went to them. They invited me to lunch at Frank's restaurant, which is a big restaurant up in Harlem. I took the plays and I went up there and I sat down with them, and the place was packed because it's a very famous restaurant, right? I started reading these two plays to Clarence and Al. The people in the restaurant were laughing because I was performing. I was performing all the roles.
What could have ended the company instead turned into momentum. Hooks and his team doubled down, producing groundbreaking plays like The River Niger by Joseph Walker. They became a launchpad for black playwrights, directors, and actors who would later define a generation. Figures like Moses Gunn and Denise Nicholas built careers through the company, and the NEC soon stood as a cultural powerhouse during the height of the civil rights era. Hooks wasn't just running a theater, he was shaping a movement. Even with success, the struggle never let up. By the early 1980s, the NEC was facing financial strain. Their original 145-seat theater was too small to sustain large productions, while their move to Theater 4 came with expenses that nearly drowned them. But Hooks pushed on, keeping the company relevant despite constant pressure. At the same time, his own career was booming, with major roles in films like Trouble Man and appearances across television. Fred Williamson's life has never been quiet. Long before he was making movies, he was cracking helmets on the football field. In the NFL and AFL, he earned the nickname The Hammer for his brutal forearm shivers that left opponents dizzy and sometimes unconscious. When he got traded from the Raiders to the Chiefs, he didn't even pretend to play nice. He promised to hurt someone every time they faced his old team, and he meant it. In the AFL Championship, one of his hits nearly ended Buffalo's hopes of a third straight title, and that single moment cemented his reputation as the league's bad boy. By today's rules, Williamson laughed that he'd have been fined $25,000 just for stepping on the field, and another $25,000 every time he delivered one of those signature blows. Yet, even at his peak, his salary topped out at $40,000 a season, with a rookie bonus of only $1,900. For a star cornerback, that was nothing, and he refused to fade into sales jobs like other retired players. Instead, he looked at Hollywood and decided he was better looking than the guys on screen, so why not take their roles?
When they first told me that blacks are not welcome in Europe, black movies don't do well in Europe, and I'm saying, wait a minute.
When he landed in Los Angeles, he didn't wait for permission. He became the face of the 1970s blaxploitation wave with hits like Black Caesar and 3: The Hard Way. But the real revolution wasn't just in front of the camera. In 1974, he started his own company, Po' Boy Productions, and that changed everything. The term blaxploitation was thrown around as an insult, but Williamson never accepted it. He argued nobody was being exploited when black actors, writers, and directors were finally making money and headlining films. At the height of the movement, he even bragged that he was making more than some of the white stars across the street, and audiences kept packing theaters to see him. Today, at 87, he still embodies that same defiance. Hal Williams never set out to be a Hollywood name. In the early 1960s, he was trudging through snow in Columbus, Ohio, working long shifts as both a postal worker and a corrections officer.
I was a troublemaker on the set for 5 years because The 227 that you saw is not the 227 that NBC wanted.
Acting was just a small escape in local community theater, something to break up the monotony of paychecks and routine. His parents thought he was crazy for even considering it. They told him he had a good job, a briefcase, and security, but he insisted that he was unhappy and needed to try something different. By 1968, he took the leap, moving to Los Angeles, asking relatives to help with his children, and taking a steady job with the California Youth Authority to survive while running to auditions at night. The risk started to pay off when he landed Officer Smitty on Sanford and Son. He played one half of TV's second interracial comedy duo alongside Officer Hoppy. At a time when network executives feared sponsor backlash, Hal and Howard Platt were allowed to craft their own bits, which was almost unheard of for black actors then. The progress was fragile, though. There's even a story, though never fully proven, that he was once fired from the Jimmy Stewart Show because the star didn't like being corrected by a black coworker.
So that's the one we did, and what they wanted really was Jackie and Marla to be at each other. They got that, but not the way they wanted it, but it's all. Yeah. But it was fun. It was a fun experience.
His biggest break came with 227 in 1985, but even that role was nearly erased before it began. The network originally didn't want Mary Jenkins to have a husband, and it took Marla Gibbs fighting for Hal to secure the role. Their on-screen marriage worked because it was grounded in authenticity, and behind the scenes, both pushed to keep black families portrayed with dignity. While that success looked glamorous on screen, his personal life was breaking apart. By the mid-1990s, he nearly disappeared from screens, like so many black actors whose sitcom fame faded. Yet, he refused to quit. He came back with appearances in Guess Who, Matlock, Parks and Recreation, and even podcasts well into his 80s. Danny Glover has always been more than just the tough but weary cop from Lethal Weapon.
Not easy it is to maintain a sane family life.
Well, I imagine it's tough, incredibly. I mean, your life is on the line all the time, and you have to come home to another situation.
His life away from the screen looks less like Hollywood glamour and more like the blueprint of a fighter who never knew how to back down. In 2010, at the age of 63, he was arrested at a labor union protest in Maryland after standing with workers demanding better pay. He was cuffed with 11 others, fined, and released, but the headlines reminded everyone that he wasn't just playing heroes on camera, he was living it in real time. This wasn't new for him. Back in college at San Francisco State University, Glover joined America's longest student-led strike, a 5-month walkout that forced the creation of the nation's first Black Studies department. That victory became a model for universities across the country.
Coping with that, both extremes, is to bring as much dedication and breath to both of those things, both the job, one, and then the experience with your family is another.
His activism might seem fearless, but his personal battles were even more intense. At just 15, he suffered his first epileptic seizure, and for years he feared the next one might strike at any moment. He once admitted that before going on stage, he would hide in a theater basement, whispering, "I will not have this seizure," over and over, until he calmed himself enough to perform. Against the odds, by age 35, he had broken free from epilepsy altogether. Later, as a survivor of prostate cancer, he used his platform to raise awareness about the health challenges that black men in America are too often forced to face in silence. Glover's politics have always been bold and unfiltered. He has campaigned for Haitian relief, spoken against apartheid, and protested sweatshop labor. At the 2010 Oscars, while others were showing off designer suits, he urged actors to boycott Hugo Boss over factory closures. Hollywood might have found it uncomfortable, but he didn't care. Instead of chasing endless sequels, he often chose independent projects, even co-founding Louverture Films to spotlight marginalized voices around the globe. Ernie Hudson's path through Hollywood has always been tougher than it looked on screen.
I don't know what you think it means, but...
like the biggest role of your life, you know?
No, none of that. They were doing Ghostbusters, and the movie was being made by a lot of people who were really successful. Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis. You know, they had already made a number of movies. And I was the guy who was brought in. And so finding my place in the middle of that, and they were all welcoming, you know, and inclusive. the studio wasn't.
Most people know him as Winston Zeddemore, the down-to-earth Ghostbuster who balanced out the chaos of Murray and Aykroyd. What almost no one realizes is that Winston was never supposed to be the small role Hudson ended up with. The part had first been written for Eddie Murphy, and it was much bigger, filled with major dialogue and central to the story. When Murphy backed out, the script was slashed, and by the time cameras rolled, Hudson's entire first act had been cut away. Suddenly, he was the last Ghostbuster to appear and the least developed on screen.
And the studio continued not to be. So it made it very, very difficult because I was a part of, but then very selectively I was sort of pushed aside.
That wasn't the only blow. While his 3 co-stars negotiated strong pay and creative input, Hudson was left with a much smaller salary and almost no say in how Winston was written. Even worse, when the movie became a cultural phenomenon, his image was often left off posters, action figures, and video games. Kids could buy the Ghostbusters team in toy stores, but Winston was sometimes missing altogether. Hudson has spoken about it many times, pointing out that if Eddie Murphy had played the role, he would have been paid far more and given far more respect.
It took a long time for the studio, and even now, we're negotiating a new movie that's gearing up to start shooting in March, and I'm like, guys, there's a place that I'm not an add-on.
Still, Hudson refused to fade. He kept working constantly, building a career on roles that showed his range. He went from supernatural cult hits like The Crow to the brutal HBO prison series Oz, proving he wasn't defined by one character. His personal discipline kept him sharp. Weightlifting, martial arts, and a strict work ethic meant that even in his late 70s, headlines were calling him ageless when photos of his lean, muscular frame appeared online. At 78, he looked closer to 50, a living example of resilience. Hudson's philosophy is simple. He never expected Hollywood to make it easy, so he just kept showing up. That persistence, more than any single paycheck or poster, became his legacy. For younger black actors trying to navigate the same obstacles, Ernie Hudson isn't just a Ghostbuster. He's proof that surviving the system can be its own kind of victory. Ben Vereen's story is filled with as much heartbreak as it is brilliance. To the world, he's the dazzling performer who lit up Broadway in Pippin and gave an unforgettable performance as Chicken George in Roots.
The alternative doesn't work. I wake up in the morning, I give praise and I give thanks for another opportunity to do whatever I have to do to hopefully do it better and do better than I did yesterday.
But away from the stage, his life has been marked by tragedies so heavy they sound almost unreal. In December 1987, his daughter Nadja, only 16 years old, was killed in a horrific car accident in Newark, New Jersey.
I think that a mother knows. A mother knows.
A tractor trailer toppled onto the family van, crushing it. Rescue workers struggled for hours to remove her body, while Vereen's ex-wife, though physically unharmed, was left devastated. The truck driver was convicted of death by auto, but in the end, he received only probation and a small fine, something that left the family shattered. More than 3 decades later, in 2020, Vereen faced another devastating blow when his son, Ben Vereen Jr., went missing and was later confirmed dead, though details were scarce and kept mostly private. As if that wasn't enough, Vereen himself nearly lost his own life in 1992 in what can only be described as a nightmare sequence of events. First, he crashed his Corvette into a tree, hitting his head so hard he had to be hospitalized. Later that same night, as he walked along the highway, he was struck by a utility vehicle and thrown into the air, suffering such severe injuries that early reports even claimed he had a stroke at the scene.
Then you are usually on top of it, and sometimes it hits you in the back. That's your challenge. That's not a challenge. That's an opportunity for the better, for me.
His condition was so dire that friends and doctors doubted he would ever perform again. But through sheer determination, he fought his way back, relearning how to walk and speak, and eventually returning to the stage with the same intensity that had always defined him. Critics marveled at how his performances carried the same fire, even after such a near-fatal ordeal. His later years brought controversy as well. In 2018, Vereen publicly apologized after allegations of sexual misconduct during a 2015 theater production surfaced, a scandal that placed him among the Howd Me Too stories, reshaping Broadway and Hollywood. Glynn Turman's story is nothing like a straight path through Hollywood. At only 12 years old, he was already on Broadway, acting alongside Sidney Poitier in the original 1959 run of A Raisin in the Sun. That single role set him on a road of constant reinvention, where he moved between theater, television, and film without ever being boxed in. Most people know him from A Different World or The Wire, but that's only a fraction of who he is.
I was an adventurous youngster. Harlem was great as far as I was concerned. I loved it. I do know an event happened, and soon after we moved.
What makes Turman stand out from nearly every other actor of his generation is that his cowboy image isn't some studio invention. He is a real competitor in the rodeo world. By the late 1990s, he had joined the U.S. Team Roping Championships, riding and roping with the same focus he brought to acting. In 1999, he shocked many by qualifying for the national finals in Oklahoma City and finishing in the top 5 nationwide.
So that's when I knew something had changed. I'm not in it for the money. I'm paid to wait and I act for free. It's the work that attracts me. I only like, at this point, working with people who are serious about the business, who've given it up. I like surrounding myself with those like-minded.
That kind of success is rare enough for a professional cowboy, but almost unheard of for a Hollywood star, especially a black man in a sport long dominated by white competitors. Rodeo legend Charlie Sampson once gave him his own championship saddle, a gesture of deep respect that cowboys consider the ultimate honor. Even decades later, in 2021, Turman became the face of Beyoncé's Ivy Park Rodeo campaign, proving that his cowboy roots are as authentic as his acting credits. His personal life has had its own dramatic turns. He married Aretha Franklin in 1978, and though the marriage ended in 1984, they remained close friends until her death, a rare example of Hollywood relationships ending on good terms.
So I found myself in the movies or at the stables at Central Park because I was fascinated with horses. To get a chance to ride a horse, that's what I would do when I should have been at math class.
Even in his later years, Turman never slowed down. He won an Emmy in 2008 for In Treatment, and his performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom in 2020 showed he could still command the screen with the same intensity he had as a teenager on Broadway. Demond Wilson's story feels like two different lives stitched together. Long before millions knew him as Lamont on Sanford and Son, he was a young soldier fighting in Vietnam.
I dropped out of school, college, my sophomore year, to go to D.C. to do a play.
From 1966 to 1968, he served with the 4th Infantry Division, was wounded in combat, and came home carrying both scars and memories that never left him. Instead of peace, he found himself slipping deeper into heroin addiction, something that haunted him before and after the war.
You name your biggest white actors, you name your biggest female Latino actresses, they all have to do it.
Hollywood fame made things worse, not better. When Sanford and Son became a primetime hit, Wilson was suddenly making around $40,000 a week. On the surface, he was a star with money, cars, and success. But behind the scenes, he was sinking under the weight of a cocaine habit that cost him about $1,000 every single week. His marriage was shaky, and by the 3rd year of the show, he admitted he felt completely empty. He later described that period with painful honesty, saying nothing was real and that his life had no meaning despite all the fame. War trauma, drug use, and the pressures of celebrity collided in a way that nearly destroyed him. Everything changed in the early 1980s. In May 1982, standing alone on a tennis court, Wilson had what he called his epiphany. He prayed to God, promising to change if his family could be restored. From that moment, he committed himself to a different path. He lost 35 pounds, gave up Hollywood's fast life, and devoted himself to ministry. Within a short time, he became a born-again Christian and eventually an ordained evangelist. Instead of studio audiences, he was speaking to crowds of 20,000 people, delivering sermons with the same energy that once carried his comedy lines.
Kids followed me. They followed my dress style. They followed the coolness, the way I walked. When I was in the war, I was a leader. I ain't never followed nobody. So these cliques, I could tell you things about people you named that the little Fruit Loops. They bend over billies. You cannot make it to the top in that industry without selling your soul.
Wilson didn't stop there. In 1995, he founded the Restoration House, an organization aimed at helping former inmates rebuild their lives. He also wrote several Christian books, using his story of survival and faith to inspire others who felt broken. Samuel L. Jackson's success looks effortless when you watch him dominate the screen, but his path to superstardom was anything but smooth. As a child, he suffered from a severe stutter that made speaking a constant battle. The frustration was so overwhelming that he developed an unusual trick in speech therapy, slipping the word "motherfucker" into sentences to loosen his tongue. That rebellious method not only helped him control his stutter, it eventually shaped the fiery cadence that became his trademark voice.
Because I remember what they thought making America great again means, or what it all means, or who needs to be, subverted or shut up.
Yet his voice wasn't the only thing he had to fight for. Through the 1980s, Jackson wrestled with drug and alcohol addiction that nearly ended his career before it truly began. He later admitted he was trapped in a cycle of dependency that left him broken and unreliable, and it reached a breaking point in 1991. That year, he entered the Hazelden Rehabilitation Center in Minnesota, where he went through a grueling program of therapy and counseling. Rehab forced him to confront the psychological roots of his addiction, and with the support of family and community, he walked away sober.
It was pretty out there to see that, and the change of the, culture.
What makes his story even more remarkable is how he rebuilt from there. Within just a few years of leaving rehab, Jackson delivered his breakout role in Pulp Fiction, and from then on, he became unstoppable. He has since played everything from hardened criminals to Jedi Masters, and of course, Nick Fury, the backbone of the Marvel Universe. His films have pulled in more than $27 billion worldwide, making him the highest-grossing black actor in history and one of the most bankable stars of all time. Avery Brooks never treated acting as just reciting lines. When he stepped into the role of Captain Benjamin Sisko on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, he carried with him the heart of a jazz musician and the discipline of a trained theater artist.
Once I was in a parade, in Hollywood parade, and the children were yelling and screaming as we were waving, like that. And I could hear the people saying, well, who is he? Because I'm waving and smiling, and they said, oh, I know, that's the one. You look so different without that thing on your face. You're blind.
Instead of sticking strictly to the script, Brooks often shifted the rhythm of his dialogue, stretching a pause here or cutting a phrase short there, the way a saxophonist might bend a note in the middle of a solo. Cast members described moments where he would suddenly change the tone or pacing mid-scene, and the effect was magnetic.
Part of the reason that I decided to do this role was the pilot. I thought it was an extraordinary script where, you were looking at a man who was trying to find peace.
His path to that chair was itself groundbreaking. Brooks became the first African-American to earn an MFA in acting and directing from Rutgers University, an achievement that signaled not only talent, but also a commitment to expanding what performance could mean. He later poured that same energy into teaching, serving as artist in residence at several universities, where he influenced new generations of actors and musicians. Outside the classroom and beyond the soundstage, Brooks lived his life as a complete artist. He was an accomplished jazz pianist and vocalist, often blending music into his stage work and even directing productions centered on jazz themes. For him, performance was never confined to one medium. Acting, teaching, and music were all expressions of the same creative pulse. What made his run as Cisco historic wasn't only that he was the first black actor to lead a Star Trek series, but also the way he wove African-American culture, spirituality, and identity into the show. Clifton Powell may not always be the headline star, but his face and voice are instantly familiar to anyone who has watched black cinema over the last 3 decades. With more than 100 film and television roles under his belt, he has built a career on consistency and impact. Yet, the road was never easy.
I'm a character actor. Yeah. And if anybody wants to know, I wanted to be a football player. I was the worst actor in my program.
Powell has openly shared how early in his career, casting directors would tell him he was too dark for certain parts. Those words cut deep, a reminder of how colorism still shapes opportunities in Hollywood. But instead of giving up, he turned the rejection into fuel, carving out a reputation as the actor who could step into any supporting role and make it unforgettable.
Once I fell in love with the arts, I just worked my ass off.
Yeah.
And, you know, I morph in and out of characters. And what else people don't understand, I was the last choice for every one of these movies that you see me in, for the most part.
His specialty became the kind of characters that drive stories forward without necessarily being the glamorous lead. In Ray, he delivered a grounded performance as Jeff Brown, Ray Charles's confidant. In Menace II Society, his presence amplified the film's gritty realism, and in Rush Hour, he gave the kind of edge that made the comedy work. Directors began to rely on him for authority, menace, or depth, knowing Powell could bring weight to every scene. That trust eventually translated into multiple NAACP Image Awards, recognition from an industry that once tried to sideline him. What sets Powell apart is not just his longevity, but also his honesty. While many actors keep quiet about discrimination to protect their careers, Powell speaks candidly about the barriers he faced and continues to face. Off-screen, he uses that candor to mentor younger performers, encouraging them not to shrink themselves or hide their identities for a paycheck. His message is clear. Talent matters more than the boxes the industry tries to put you in. Even after decades in the business, Powell's career remains steady. He is proof that you don't need to be the leading man to build a legacy.